not, well, what I want to do now is I'm going to introduce our next speakers. And so we're really lucky to have John Hogan and Natalie Katz, who are going to give us a report on the use of artificial intelligence and the use of data from our US registry of FSHD patients and family members, where a number of you may be a part of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to them.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Statland. Hey everyone, I'm Natalie. I'm one of the investigators that's on this project, I guess you could say. I'm actually a child neurology resident still in my training, but I have an interest in neuromuscular medicine, and FSHD is one of those diseases that jumped out at me very early on when I became interested in this field. So I'm very excited to be working on this project with Dr. Statland and John, and I'm excited to be able to share some of these results with you today. So let me just go ahead and share my screen with you. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So yeah, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. This is a project looking at the use of artificial intelligence and looking at risk factors. And one of those risk factors that we were looking at was the use of wheelchair use in patients who have FSHD. So it's just a brief outline of the talk today. We'll talk a little bit about the National Registry for those of you who may not be familiar with it. We'll look at some of the findings that have come out of this data using some of our more traditional epidemiological methods. And then we'll hear from John and his experience in artificial intelligence to see what kind of results have come out of the data using this method. And then we'll just briefly summarize some of the conclusions. So I think most of you are familiar with this already, and Dr. Statland did a wonderful review, just kind of the underlying genetic basis of FSHD, but we know that it's a dominantly inherited disease. And for individuals who have FSHD type 1, we know that those individuals typically have that deletion in the D4Z4 region where they have less than 10 repeats in that chromosome. We know that it's slowly progressive and that individuals can have variability within not only themselves, but within different families and even between generations, so between parents and their children, or even between siblings within the same family. And even some individuals can have differences in how the disease presents, with different parts of the body being affected differently. And we know that as this disease goes on, it can be associated with significant morbidity, and that patients just aren't able to function as well as they normally would if they didn't have the disease. And like Dr. Statland mentioned, one of the quotes that's often listed is that about 20% of individuals with FSHD will require the use of a wheelchair by age 50. When we look at how common this disease is in the United States, we see that FSHD affects about 1 in 15,000 to 1 in 20,000 individuals. And most of those individuals are classified as having FSHD type 1, and only a small percentage are classified as having FSHD type 2. But we know that no matter what underlying genetic cause is causing this disease, we see that both of these patients in both categories have very similar clinical outcomes. So just a little bit about the National Registry for those of you who aren't familiar with this. It's called the National Registry for Myotonic Dystrophy and FSHD, and this registry is housed at the University of Rochester, which is up in Rochester, New York. This is a picture of their beautiful campus down here in the corner. And these quotes are taken directly from their website. So the registry's main goals are to advance research and knowledge of myotonic dystrophy and FSHD. And what they're really interested in is connecting researchers with patients who are interested in hearing about research updates and studies that they may be eligible to participate in. And what's really important to us as clinicians and investigators is learning about what's important to you and your family so that we can focus our efforts on trying to tackle those issues. Enrollment in the registry is completely free. And if you at any time decide you no longer wish to participate, then you can withdraw from the registry at any time. And if you're interested in participating, this is the website that you can go to enroll in the registry if you haven't already, and we'll show this website again at the end of the talk. So with that, we'll kind of dive into the data that we have accumulated from the registry. So when we look at the registry as a whole, we analyzed data from 578 patients with FSHD type 1. And for the purposes of this particular study, we excluded patients who were diagnosed as having FSHD type 2, but we know that that's a very small percentage of individuals. And so when we look at the data, we see that men and women are pretty equally represented in this data set. We see that men are about 52% of the study population, and women represent about 48% of the study population. We see that most of the individuals who are in the study are actually of Caucasian background, so about 92% of those individuals, and most of them report that they're of non-Hispanic or non-Latino origin. And when we look at the education status of this group, we see that most of these individuals are pretty well educated. About 2/3 of them have achieved at least a college degree or higher. So then we started to look a little bit more about the disease characteristics itself. So when we look at the group as a whole, we see that the average age of diagnosis in general is around 33 years of age. But when we look at when those individuals first report symptom onset, we see that they started developing symptoms much earlier, around 22 years of age. And something that's, when we dig a little bit deeper, we actually see that over half of those individuals reported symptom onset prior to age 18, which is something that is very important to me as a pediatric neurologist in trying to identify these individuals much sooner. When we look at the underlying genetics of these individuals, we see that most of the participants in the study had between 4 and 7 repeats, so almost 60% of individuals in the study had between 4 and 7 repeats. And when we look at those initial symptoms that they reported, we see that the most common symptoms that were reported as their presenting symptom involved facial weakness, or that proximal upper extremity weakness, so weakness involving the shoulder or the scapular region. So then we wanted to dive into things a little bit further and see, does gender have any influence on the genetics? And so what you see here is just a breakdown between the different classifications of repeats, so 1 to 3 repeats, 4 to 7, or 8 to 10, and then we looked at males and females within each of those categories. And when we look at the most common reported repeat sizes, 4 to 7 group, we see that men and women are fairly equally represented in this group. But when we look at individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats, we see a slightly higher number of females in this group compared to males. And when we look at individuals who have between 8 and 10 repeats, we actually see a slightly higher number of males in this group compared to females. So then we wanted to look at the genetics to see, does this have any influence on the age at which these individuals are diagnosed? So just to walk you through this diagram here, on the x-axis, we have the age at which these individuals are diagnosed, with younger ages over here on the left and increasing age over here on the right. And then the y-axis here is a cumulative probability plot. So what this means is that by the time you reach 1 here, this is representative of 100% of individuals in that category being diagnosed. So these different lines here, this light pink line is representative of individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats. This bright red line is individuals who have 4 to 7 repeats, and this darker red line is individuals who have 8 to 10 repeats. And so when we look at these different repeat categories and compare them to the age at which they are diagnosed, we see a pretty striking difference in the age of diagnosis. So individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats tend to be on average diagnosed around age 14, and most individuals in this category are diagnosed between ages 11 and 17. When we look at folks who have 4 to 7 repeats, we see on average these individuals are diagnosed around age 30. And when we look at individuals who have 8 to 10 repeats, we see on average that they're diagnosed around age 40. So we then wanted to make things a little bit more complicated. So we wanted to look at the genetics and the age of diagnosis, but then we also wanted to factor in gender to see, is there a difference between men and women within each of these categories and the ages at which they're diagnosed. So again, on the x-axis, you have the age of diagnosis with younger age on the left and increasing age to the right. And again, that cumulative probability on the y-axis. So by the time we reach 1 or 100% of those individuals in that category have been diagnosed. And just to go through the coding here, so in this light pink line, again, we have individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats, but this is representative of females in this group. The bright red line is females who have 4 to 7 repeats, and the dark red line is females who have 8 to 10 repeats, and then we have males color-coded in the blue here. So males who have 1 to 3 repeats are this light blue line. Males who have 4 to 7 repeats are kind of this middle blue line, and the dark blue line is males who have 8 to 10 repeats. And so within each of these categories, we wanted to see at what age are these individuals diagnosed. So when we look at individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats, we see that on average males are diagnosed around age 16, but there's quite a wide range of when they're diagnosed within that category. And females in the 1 to 3 repeat category are diagnosed at a slightly younger age, around age 11. When we look at individuals who have 4 to 7 repeats, we actually see that men are diagnosed at a slightly younger age, around age 25, and females in this group are diagnosed at a slightly higher age, around age 35. And when you come over here and look at the graph, you can see a noticeable separation between these two groups, so maybe has some clinical significance there. And when we look at individuals who have between 8 and 10 repeats, we see that males and females are diagnosed around the same age. So males with 8 to 10 repeats on average are diagnosed around age 38 and a half, and females on average are diagnosed around age 42. So then we wanted to look at the genetics, the age at which those individuals are diagnosed, and the initial symptoms that they report when they first became symptomatic. So this graph is organized a little bit differently. On the x-axis here, we have that repeat length, or that kilobyte size, genetic size, that is representative of the different repeat lengths. So individuals with smaller numbers of repeats are going to be over here on the left-hand side of the graph, and then individuals with larger numbers of repeats, so 8 to 10 repeats, are going to be over here on the right-hand side of the graph. And on the y-axis, we have the age at which these individuals are diagnosed. So each of these different points is representative of an individual in the registry data compared to their repeat size and the age at which they're diagnosed. But then you can also see that these dots are color coded, and each of these colors represents the initial symptoms that those individuals reported when they enrolled in the study. So the category 1 is representative of facial weakness, and that's these dark blue dots that you can see here. And category 3A is representative of individuals reporting proximal upper extremity weakness as their initial symptom, and that's these light green dots that you can see here. And so when we look at individuals who have 1 to 3 repeats, or these smaller kilobyte repeat sizes, we see that most of the individuals in this category tend to report facial weakness as their initial symptom. So over half of individuals in this category reported their initial symptom as facial weakness. When we look at participants who have between 4 and 7 repeats, we see they tend to cluster kind of here in the middle of the graph, and about a third of individuals in each of these categories report that proximal upper extremity weakness, or weakness in that shoulder and scapular region, as their initial symptoms. So then we wanted to look at how does genetics influence wheelchair use. And so what we see here is that we have these categorized by the different genetic repeats. And so individuals with 1 to 3 repeats are here on the left, individuals with 4 to 7 repeats are in the middle, and those individuals with 8 to 10 repeats are on the right-hand side. And we compared these genetics to the age at which folks in these categories reported first using a wheelchair. And so what you can see here is pretty clearly that individuals who have between 1 and 3 repeats tend to use a wheelchair at a much earlier age compared to individuals who have between 4 and 7 or 8 to 10 repeats. And when we do some of our analyses, we see that folks who have between 1 to 3 repeats compared to those who have 4 to 7 repeats, individuals in this category are about 4 times more likely to end up using a wheelchair. And there's really not much difference between age of wheelchair use for individuals who have 4 to 7 or 8 to 10 repeat. And when we look across all of the different groups, we actually see that women are more likely to end up in a wheelchair as compared to their male counterparts across all of the different groups. So this is really what we were able to identify using the registry data and some of our more traditional analysis. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John to talk about some of his interesting findings with his use of the artificial intelligence techniques. So John, it's all you.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm looking all red here, but I'm not sunburned and I am not drinking. at this point. So I just want to let you know that. I thought I'd put on the beach background because maybe it looks like I am getting sunburned. But my story is I do own an AI company. Spent 20 years at IBM. The last 5 years of my time at IBM was spent in AI research and dealing with customers who wanted to implement AI. About 5 years ago, I realized, hey, I can't raise my upper arms. And wasn't sure why, but I decided to go get that investigated. And of course, the local doctors, well, I shouldn't say of course, but the local doctors didn't quite know what was happening. So I ended up going to Columbia and met a great doctor there called Matt Harms. And Matt Harms is, looked at me, basically took one look at me and said, oh, you got FSHD. So 5 years ago, my journey with FSHD started, and my parents didn't tell me, as I said, and I went ahead and had 5 kids. So this has become quite an important topic. And I was, Dr. Harms, what can I do? I have all this AI experience. Is there any data sets that we could look at? And he was like, yeah, we have a great data set. It's called the FSHD Registry. It's housed up in Rochester. Go talk to Dr. Tawil. And so I did that, met up with Jeff Statland here, and sort of presented the idea that let's just throw some AI techniques at the registry and see what comes up. And by the way, is there any sort of particular issue that AI could really try to help with? And the issue was, well, this great variability. Like myself, I didn't feel anything until I was about 50. But others, of course, are diagnosed quite early and quite severely affected. So let's just throw AI at the registry, sort of the kitchen sink approach, as I said here. Bunch of techniques, put it out there, see what comes back that might impact the variability of people. And sort of the trigger that the AI is looking for is, who's ending up in a wheelchair? It's a great event to look at because it's very binary. Either you have to use a wheelchair or you don't have to use a wheelchair. So we commenced this project. And by the way, my company we're not looking at a commercial opportunity here. This is something that's more personal. But go ahead, advance the slide, please. So this is what came out. So AI. This is like the simplest form of AI, right? This is not general AI like the Terminator, where he, goes off and, runs through the streets and he's able to interpret everything around him and, facial recognition and, he's able to actually operate like a human being. This is more of a statistical based AI. And the key concept here is that the AI learns about the data and then tries to go and interpret the data. It goes to the areas where it gets signal and says, okay, these particular items in the data appear to be important. And this is a chart of those items. And you can read this as contributing to a prediction of wheelchair. And so you would say long duration, which is the #1 feature. So duration a person had the disease, plus actually all the age things. If you were diagnosed young, you're of an older age, you're going to get sort of a combination of effects on this chart that sort of lead you to wheelchair use. You can just see some of those things here. So it's a combination of the demographics about the person, like the age, BMI, body mass index, but also comorbidities like breathing, arthritis, pneumonia. We threw everything in here. We threw medications that people reported they were taking, the symptoms, symptom types, the genetics, so that, repeat length we've been hearing about. And, just sort of threw it into the mix to see what came out. And so this is an interesting chart, and you can sort of see the things that were important to the AI model here on this chart. If you go to the next chart, though, one of the key issues with interpreting what comes out of an AI model is, all right, why did it choose things? And what we have here is a highly advanced, well, not advanced, but sort of a new technique to explain AI. It's called SHAP, and it's based on game theory, which is well known, I think, since post-World War II. But what we're trying to do here is run every person and every symptom through the model that we just created. And for the AI enthusiasts, we chose a random forest model. And by the way, if anybody has any questions after this or wants to start a more in-depth conversation, just let me know. So it throws every person, every symptom into the model to see how each of these little things contributes. And each dot is a person and a symptom. So there's a lot of dots here, 578 people. And we looked at, we're not showing all the symptoms here, but or all the features, but we, probably I think it was 40 or 50 features in the data. We're showing the top 20. The red dots indicate high. The blue dots indicate low. 1, which is all the way to the right here, and you can't see it, it's off the chart here, but that means wheelchair, yes. And blue, or all the way to the left, means wheelchair, no. All right, so red is high, wheelchair is 1, no wheelchair is 0. And anything that moves to the left is good. Anything that moves to the right, or is 0 and to the right of 0, contributes to that wheelchair decision, right? And so one question you might have is, well, okay, I have high duration, I've had the disease for 20 years. Well, that is obviously going to contribute, but it's not the only thing that's going to contribute. You may have had the disease 20 years, I've had it. I diagnosed 5 years, but I'm older too. But I'm not in a wheelchair. So this is trying to explain the variability, but if you have a combination of, say, high duration and breathing difficulties and low BMI, and you're a woman, then the model will tend to predict that you will be in a wheelchair. So that's what this is trying to say. It's an and duration, and number of minutes, and age. Gets the model to predict that. And so you can see here, actually breathing, just to pick on that for a minute, if anybody reported breathing difficulties, the model is pretty heavily contributing to a wheelchair prediction for that person. And just going to the one right above it, age. So blue means low or younger age. If you were diagnosed at a younger age, that is also contributing to the prediction of a wheelchair. All right, number of meds. If you're taking a large number of meds in this model, it's contributing fairly significantly to wheelchair prediction. Now, one thing you may not see here is, well, where's all the genetic information? And it is on here down below. H is somebody who has the most, the shortest allele size. And so you can see it's important, but it's not as important as some of these other demographic and related features. So there's a lot to say about this. There's a lot of information in here. And I think this first project with AI on the registry is actually just the first project. We're sort of setting up the model for which we can do other AI studies. And Dr. Statland was great enough to make this work, and we're gonna take it to the next level very soon. And I'll just say one more thing about the data that's being collected. It's extremely important. You can't imagine how happy I was to find like a ready-made data set that I could begin to work on with AI. And in the future, we hope to combine this data set with other international data sets like France and the UK. And AI loves more data. The more data we put in there, the better results we'll have. There's another slide on here. Okay, yeah, that explains it. And I think we're just into conclusions at this point.
Yep. Yeah, I think we kind of talked about most of this stuff already. I didn't advance the slide for you, but.
Okay, yeah, just go. So Natalie, if you want to go ahead and just.
Sure. Yep, so just kind of in general to reiterate some of the findings that we found in the study. So patients who have 1 to 3 repeats on average tend to be diagnosed at a younger age. We see that individuals who have 4 to 7 repeats within that category, men tend to be diagnosed at a slightly younger age compared to women in that same category. And then when we look at initial symptoms, we see that folks who have between 1 and 3 repeats most often tend to report facial weakness as their initial symptoms. And then patients who have between 4 and 7 or 8 to 10 repeats most often tend to report weakness in their shoulder scapular region. Then we see that individuals who have between 1 and 3 repeats tend to use a wheelchair at a younger age, and that there's kind of going into some of John's findings with the AI, kind of corroborates all of these findings, and then starts to look at why that might be the case. And we see that duration of the disease is one of the most important features contributing to wheelchair use. But like he said, we need more data, more modeling to look a little bit more into these stuff. So this was one of our pilot studies using the registry data that I think we found some really interesting results from. And so this is kind of the end of our talk. We're happy to take any questions that you guys might have. And again, this is just the web page for the National Registry. If you're not already involved, like John said, it's really great to have your participation in this so that we can help understand the disease a little bit better, so that we can use those findings to help things down the line and help meet that goal of having a treatment by 2025. So with that, we can take any questions that you guys might have.
So it looks like there's a couple of questions in the comment or in chat. Terry has a question, if you could define what duration means, because it is a hereditary disease and you are born with it, what are you defining duration as?
An initial symptom to whatever your age was when you filled out the form to enter the registry. So it's a calculated, it's a calculated feature of the data.
Okay, and then Nils also has a comment. He says, your wheelchair data raises a question. Is there variability of repeats within families? For example, he is a male and he started in a wheelchair at 28. His mother, when she was first in a wheelchair was 45. His uncle at 60 and his sister is 58 and transitioning now.
Yeah, we definitely see variability within families and the age at which they first report those symptoms. And so that kind of goes back to some of the underlying genetics, I think, and trying to better understand that genetic variability that we see within families and between generations for different families who are diagnosed.